It took Andrew almost an hour to calm down and go home. He never expected to receive such news this afternoon. He couldn't imagine how he would tell his wife, and then his daughter. She's only 8, but she'll understand. Andrew didn't even know how everything would turn out. The atmosphere at home had already been tense for weeks, and it seemed to him that his news would be the last straw in a losing battle. When he entered the house, it was unusually quiet for the last day of the school year. His wife, Anne, was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, some papers lying on the sofa nearby. "Hello? Why is it so quiet, dear? Where is Oli?" he asked. "She's with her mother." "I'll pick her up later, after our conversation," she replied. Andrew was confused. She couldn't already know everything. Or could she? "There's no easy way to say this, Andrew, so I'll just say it. I met another man and am madly in love with him. We're leaving tonight for a month's trip. We're taking Olivia with us. We told her she would be swimming in the ocean, and she was delighted." "What?" "Here are the divorce papers. I will get full custody of Olivia. I know this is hard to hear, but this month will allow you to get over the breakup easier. You will be given the official notice tomorrow. We can discuss the details when I get back." She stood up and headed towards the front door. "Wait, I want to see my daughter. Andrew, Michael, and I decided that it would be better for Olivia if you didn't see her. We told her that you might join us on the trip if you can take time off from work, so she doesn't even expect it. Hopefully she'll stop thinking about it in a few days." "How can you?" "I will immediately call the police and report that you are kidnapping our daughter." "Don't embarrass yourself, Andrew. Michael is a powerful lawyer with incredible connections. All this has already been provided for. Just accept the new reality, dear. Michael says it will be easier for everyone. And there is something I learned today that I need to tell you now. This changes everything, believe me." Andrew's voice broke. His throat was tight with tension. "Oh, I'm sure this is very important, Andrew, but trust me, it can wait until I get back, okay? For now, the driver is waiting." "I'm dying, Anne," he shouted when she came out. "Don't be so dramatic, Andrew. You'll survive," she said, getting into an unfamiliar car that was waiting for her. 10 seconds later, she was gone. Andrew tried to call her, but she left the phone on the bedside table. He then tried to call his mother-in-law to talk to Olivia, but there was no answer. He called the police to report the child abduction. After some time, 2 policemen arrived to take his statement. They said they would contact him within 24 hours. There was no news that night. He fell asleep on the sofa long after midnight. Waking up with a severe headache, he discovered that the next morning the police still had not reported anything, but had received a message from an unknown number. The message included a photo of Olivia, Anne, and a strange man. All 3 were on the beach. A real family photo, but with a different father. That was the end. Game over. Anne was glad to be home after a wonderful but tiring trip. She was surprised but relieved to see that Andrew was not at home. In general, everything in the house looked as if no one had been there for a long time. The divorce papers and her glass of wine were still lying on the sofa. There was an unopened envelope on the chair. But what surprised her the most was that all of Andrew's clothes and personal belongings were still in their bedroom and his office. Not finding her father at home, Olivia went to visit her best friend, who lived across the street. Anne plugged her phone into charge after a month of inactivity and discovered several missed calls from a local number she didn't recognize. It could wait. She had a lot of dirty laundry and needed to do the laundry. She was about to go out to run a few errands when the phone rang. "Mrs. Ann Coleman?" "Yes, it's me. My name is Christine Ryerson. I am from Bellevue Hospice. We have tried to contact you several times today. I regret to inform you that your husband Andrew passed away in the early hours of this morning." "What? What the hell? Hospice? What is this? A joke?" "Because she's not funny at all. Mrs. Coleman, I was informed that your husband never got around to telling you that he had an aggressive glioblastoma, a terminal stage of brain cancer." Anne heard nothing after Miss Ryerson's words. She sat down on the sofa, amazed. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. "Are you Mrs. Ann Coleman?" asked the young woman. Yes, Anne answered hesitantly. A letter for you, ma'am. If you have any questions, you can contact attorney Robert Horton. His business card is in an envelope. Have a good day. Anne opened the letter with trembling hands. Anne, thank you for letting me say goodbye to Olivia. Don't worry, I left something for her. In time, she will know what you have done and what kind of father you have replaced with me. Andrew. The next few days were unbearable. Constant pain, nausea, dizziness, and confusion were interrupted only by attacks of tearing agony. It seemed as if a monster with fangs and claws had settled in my head and was periodically trying to break out. I felt terribly embarrassed about the way my pain reflected on the nurses, but they never complained, continuing to smile and try to ease my condition. I don't know how long I lay there like that, but I remember the tear-stained faces of my loved ones, which I saw several times. I desperately wanted to tell them that everything would be okay, but all that came out of my mouth was mumbled babble. Early one morning, I opened my eyes and found that the pain had suddenly disappeared. Was I cured? Has the tumor gone away? I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 4:30 am. Then I saw something else, a man. But this was not just a person. It was my father, or at least his younger self. And he smiled. Ready to go fishing? I have a great place, he said. I remembered how my dad, Bill, and I went fishing when we were young. Mom enjoyed cooking the fish, but insisted that we clean it ourselves. Fishing sounds great, Dad, I replied. Come on, son. Let's go, he said, extending his hand, which I happily accepted. I stood up into the sunlight and hugged it. And the limousine that was taking Michael, me, and my daughter Olivia from the airport finally pulled up to my house. The past month with my lover had been full of fun, but I was tired and glad to finally be back home, soon to become my only home. I wasn't surprised that Andrew's car wasn't there. It was already past 9 in the morning, and I figured he was probably at work. But something in this house was wrong. Michael seemed to notice this too. Your yard looks like it hasn't been taken care of in quite some time, he noted with disapproval. Aren't you hiring a gardener? No, Andrew likes to take care of the yard himself. This is a matter of personal pride for him. He never allows himself to go more than a week without cutting his hair. His father was the same, I answered absently. But this needs to be fixed before the Hoa starts complaining. Exactly, snorted Michael, who was disgusted by the thought of physical labor, especially related to gardening tools. It looks like he's not at home, and that's good. Most likely he went to work. He's probably gone to fix someone's little computer glitch, I replied contemptuously. Well, remember what I said. If he even thinks about looking at your askance, call me immediately. I'll call Judge Stanton and put a restraining order on him so quickly his head will spin, Michael said. The thought of Andrew being led out of the house handcuffed while neighbors filmed him yawning made me smile. But I knew it would never happen. Andrew is a gentle man and won't even dare to lay a finger. I don't think that will be necessary, I said. It's not a question of necessity, Anne. It's a question of winning the game, Michael said smugly. If anything goes wrong, we always have a plan B. You know we have FR ready to do whatever it takes. I knew what Michael meant by plan B. We discussed this in detail with his Colombian friends in Cancun. As much as I wanted to see Andrew get caught up in false accusations of trafficking illegal substances and distributing sexy photos, I didn't want to traumatize Olivia. Well, at least not too much. It was bad enough that I took her away from Andrew for a month with no contact. She periodically became sad and withdrawn, which was not at all like her, but Michael and I did not let this distract us. She'll just have to get used to it. Do you think I should annoy him a little? Maybe prick him with your adultery, I asked. Whatever it takes, honey, Michael replied with a grin. By the way, would you like me to take your bags to the house? No, I don't think that's wise. There are a lot of prying eyes and gossips here. I don't want to provoke any more rumors than they probably already have. Still, over the past month, no one here has seen either me or Olivia. Whatever you say, Michael replied. The driver opened the trunk and got out of the car while I kissed Michael goodbye. I walked out when he opened the door for me and watched as Olivia politely said goodbye to Michael. We took our bags and went to the front door. I was a little surprised when my key fit into the lock. I've read a lot about husbands who change the locks to keep cheating wives out of the house. And to be honest, in recent months, I myself have been such a wife a cheater. But not for long. Before opening the door, I glanced at the large mailbox attached to the house and saw that it was filled with letters. Didn't Andrew even bother to check his email? I didn't worry about our monthly bills, they were paid automatically from the joint account. But Andrew could still bring the mail into the house. I shook my head in exasperation. I opened the door and walked in, waving goodbye to Michael. Entering the house, I was surprised to see that everything looked exactly the same as the day I left a month ago, and the house was dark and quiet. Too dark and quiet, almost like a crypt. It seemed like no one had been inside for quite some time. There was even a light layer of dust on the surfaces. "Andrew," I called, looking around the lower floor. "Are you home? We're back." My voice sounded muffled in the frightening silence, which gave me an unpleasant chill. Something was definitely wrong here, but I couldn't figure out what it was. "Mom, since Daddy's not home, I'll go to Melissa's across the street, okay?" Olivia asked. "Of course, honey," I replied absent-mindedly. "Be careful when crossing the road." "Okay," Olivia called as she walked out. I went upstairs, put my bags on the bed, and plugged my phone into the charger. I noticed that during the morning there were several calls from an unfamiliar number starting at 4:45 am. Probably spammers. Andrew added our numbers to a spam call blocking list, which prevented 90% of these calls, but a few still occasionally got through. While the phone was charging, I continued to look around the house. All of Andrew's clothes and toiletries were still there, so he probably never left. And yet the feeling as if I was in a tomb only intensified. I collected our clothes to put them in the wash when suddenly the phone rang. It was the same number that had called several times before, and after a short pause I finally answered, ready to tell them to leave me alone. "May I speak to Mrs. Ann Coleman?" A female voice rang out when I answered. "Yes, it's me," I replied, slightly puzzled. "Mrs. Coleman, my name is Christine Rayerson. I'm calling from the palliative care unit at Bellevue Clinic. We have tried to contact you several times this morning. I am very sorry to inform you that your husband Andrew passed away in the early hours of this morning." I froze, staring at the wall, not believing what I just heard. "What?" I exclaimed. "What the hell? Palliative care? Is this some kind of sick joke? Because this is not funny at all." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "This is not a joke, Mrs. Coleman. I have been informed that your husband failed to inform you that he had aggressive and inoperable brain cancer before you left for Cancun." "Cancun? How did this girl know I was in Cancun? Is this some kind of clever trick by Andrew?" But still, Christine's words pulled the rug out from under me. Was Andrew telling the truth when he said he was dying? What did I answer then? "Don't be dramatic, Andrew. You will survive everything." The girl's voice brought me back to reality. "So should I come and pick up the body or what?" I asked, suddenly realizing that divorce was no longer necessary, and I chuckled. "That is not necessary, madam. Mr. Coleman took care of all the formalities at the beginning of the month. He has already been transported to the Spencer Funeral Home. Please accept my condolences. If you need help, we have counselors available to help you cope with your loss." "Thank you, but this won't be necessary," I replied and ended the call. I sat there for a while, not knowing what to think, until I heard the doorbell ring. What else? I opened the door. "Are you Mrs. Ann Coleman?" asked a young woman wearing a shirt with the Acme Courier Service logo. "Yes," I answered with some hesitation. "I have been asked to deliver this letter to you, madam. You have been asked to contact Mr. Robert Horton, a lawyer, as soon as you receive one. The envelope also contains his business card. Have a good day." I waited until the woman had left, then, with trembling hands, I opened the envelope. "And," the letter began, Thank you for letting me say goodbye to Olivia. Don't worry, I left her everything she needed. In time, she will find out what you did and what person you chose instead of me." The letter was signed Andrew. I snorted, annoyed and puzzled. I looked at the business card and saw that the number was underlined in black ink. Below it was written, "Call immediately." Well, I thought, at least I'll be able to get some answers. I took the phone and dialed the number. "Horton," a voice said when the call was answered. "Robert, this is Ann Coleman," I said. "Yes, I am aware. I see you arrived safely from Cancun. As you probably already know, your husband passed away this morning. I need to meet you and Olivia in my office at 11 o'clock sharp to discuss the inheritance," Robert said. I could almost feel the hatred coming from him through the phone. I remembered that Robert and Andrew had been friends for many years. "Of course, Robert. We will. Can I take someone with me for moral support?" I asked. If possible, his tone became even colder. "It's your right, Mrs. Coleman. But I must warn you that this is not a trial or negotiation, so Mr. Simpson's presence is neither required nor encouraged. He can accompany you if he behaves decently. Clear?" "Of course, Robert," I replied, stunned that Andrew would share our private affairs with others. It wasn't like him at all. "Very good. 11 o'clock exactly. Good luck," he said sharply and ended the call. I looked at the phone and was shocked so many people seemed to know what I had done, with whom and where I had gone. What else do they know? I looked at my watch and realized I didn't have much time left, so I called Michael. "Missing you already, cutie," Michael answered with a purr. "You know that, yes. Listen, I need your help. I just found out that Andrew died this morning from a brain tumor. Looks like he was telling the truth when he said he was dying. I just spoke with his lawyer, Robert Horton, and he wants me and Olivia to come to his office at 11 o'clock sharp. I'm too excited to drive right now, so could you come pick us up and come with me, please?" Michael's tone changed instantly. "Certainly. I'm already on my way. I'll be there in a few minutes. Don't worry." "I won't. But Michael, everyone seems to know what I did and where I was," I muttered. "So, your little computer nerd hired a private detective. So what? If this Horton tries anything, he'll regret it." "I've got your back," he said confidently. "Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. I love you." "I love you too," Michael said. "Just think, now we don't have to hide, and you will get everything your husband left. We are free, and there is no need for any more Plan B." "I didn't think about that," I said. We ended the conversation, and I felt relieved. Andrew's death meant that the house, his business, which I would immediately sell for a substantial sum, and all his savings would go to me. Maybe this really is the best outcome, I convinced myself with joy. Michael arrived just as I returned to the house with Olivia. She didn't want to leave her friend, but I insisted. I doubted that I would get any sympathy from Robert, but I was sure that Olivia's presence would help avoid trouble. Michael got out of the car and opened the doors for us. I put Olivia in the back seat, grabbed my purse, and sat next to him. "Tell me what happened," Michael said as the car started moving. "I received a call from Bellevue Palliative Care that Andrew had died this morning. Then I received a letter that Andrew wrote before he died. In it, he wrote that he had left something for Olivia and that she would find out what kind of person I had chosen to replace him. The letter included a card asking him to call his lawyer immediately. He wants us to come to him right away. Don't worry, he probably just wants you to feel guilty for leaving Andrew at this point." "Yeah, but it seems like everyone I talked to knew what I did and where we went," I said, feeling uncomfortable again. "So what? The law does not prohibit vacationing in Cancun. Leave this Horton to me," he replied. "Fine, whatever you say," I replied. We drove to the office building where Robert worked, parked, and headed to his office on the 10th floor. As soon as we walked in, I immediately saw Bill and Andrew's mother. They both looked at me with scathing looks. "Anne, Cancun seems to have been good for you," Robert said in a cold tone as he walked out into the hall. "Michael Simpson, lawyer," Michael said, puffing out his chest and stepping between me and Robert to demonstrate dominance without letting me say a word. "Yes, I know who you are," Robert replied, ignoring Michael's outstretched hand. "As I told Mrs. Coleman, this is not a trial or a negotiation. Your opinion is not required or welcomed here, and I will ask you to respect the fact that this is my office, and we are here to take care of a good man's estate." "Of course," Michael said slowly. Robert looked at Olivia and finally smiled. "How are you, Olivia?" asked Robert. "Okay, Mr. Horton. Thank you," Olivia replied in her sweet voice. "Wonderful, Olivia. Do you see that woman in the blue blouse? Her name is Jennifer, and she would love it if you could chat with her while I talk to your mom." "Fine." "Fine. Do you know where my dad is? I miss him." After a brief sad look, he cleared his throat and replied, "Yes, honey, I know. We'll talk about this later, okay?" "Okay," Olivia said and walked towards the smiling Jennifer. "Let's go to my conference room." Robert invited us, pointing to a large room. I sat down in the seat Robert pointed to, and Michael immediately sat down next to me. Bill and his mother sat a few chairs away, as if Michael were contagious. There were two more men in the room whom I did not recognize. "Who is this?" I asked. "Oh, they are. They will add something later in the meeting. Anyone want something to drink? Water, coffee, tea, soda?" Everyone agreed that water would be the best choice, and Robert's assistant left the room, returning with several bottles of ice-cold water. "If you don't mind, I'd like to record this meeting to avoid future misunderstandings," Robert said. Everyone agreed, although Michael had a look on his face as if he wanted to object, and Robert began recording. "First of all, let me express my condolences to the family," Robert began. "I know it's not easy losing a son and brother, especially someone like Andrew. He was also a good friend of mine and will be greatly missed." "Thank you, Mr. Horton," Bill said quietly. "Please call me Robert." He pulled out a manila folder from the stack of files and folders and held it up. "Mrs. Coleman, I have here the petition for divorce that you and Mr. Simpson filed against Andrew this week before leaving for Cancun. Naturally, the sudden death of Mr. Coleman makes this petition irrelevant. As Mr. Simpson can attest, no court in our state would consider such a petition against a person with a terminal diagnosis." "He's right," Michael nodded. "However, the petition and accompanying records categorically state your intention to leave the marriage and the matrimonial home. Your words to Mr. Coleman make it clear that you wanted to change your partner to a more suitable one. Therefore, although the divorce document itself is no longer relevant, its content remains important to this discussion. After you sent him a notice, he contacted me, and he acted wisely, I would say. We made several significant changes to his will, and he changed the beneficiaries of his insurance policies and investment portfolios." "What about his business?" I asked. "I was never particularly interested in his little computer business, as Michael called it, but money is money." "The business has been sold," Robert replied, "so it is no longer part of Mr. Coleman's estate." "Just a minute," Michael interrupted. "Wouldn't Anne have a share in this business? Shouldn't he have to get her consent to sell such a significant joint asset?" Robert paused, counting to 10, before answering. "As I said, your opinion is not required here. But to answer your question, first, Mr. Coleman started the business before he married Anne, so it was not marital property, and second, the cover letter that came with your divorce petition clearly stated her unwillingness to have anything to do with it." Michael turned to me with wide eyes. "You didn't want to?" I felt confused and started to get angry. Michael's tone threw me off balance, and I suddenly felt the need to defend myself. "You always spoke disparagingly about his business, and we've been married a long time, and you said we might have to, push him a little, so I thought that disparaging what he worked so hard for would help." I trailed off, seeing how everyone was looking at me, and I felt my cheeks starting to turn red. "Oh," Michael said disappointedly. "Can I continue?" asked Robert. "Great. Regarding the house, the application for mortgage insurance coverage was submitted this morning. Once this process is completed, the balance, including taxes, will be paid from the estate. Ownership will be transferred to a family trust, which will be administered by Mr. William Coleman, Andrew's brother. What does it mean? I asked, stunned by what they were saying about the house I had chosen, decorated, and lived in. That means I want you to leave this house as soon as the trust takes title, Bill said. Are you kicking me out? I asked, not believing my ears. You've been gone a long time, Bill's mother interjected in a sarcastic tone. Next, Robert continued inexorably. After all final expenses have been paid, the remainder of Mr. Coleman's substantial estate will be distributed as follows. 3/4 will go into a trust for Olivia, and the remainder will be divided equally between William Coleman and his mother. I don't have the exact amounts yet, but I know that this is more than enough for them to live in peace for the rest of their days. How much did Andrew have? I asked, stunned. In total, a little over $100 million, Robert replied. If you had only waited a month, you would have been a very rich and respected widow, he added sarcastically. He didn't leave me anything, I asked automatically, feeling as if I had been slapped and completely stunned by the amount. I didn't know, I didn't pay attention to financial issues. Andrew was doing this. The credit card bills were paid, that's all I cared about. Actually, he left it, Robert said, taking a small envelope from his stack. He handed it to me, and I swore he chuckled as he did so. I opened the envelope and gasped when I saw a photo of Andrew giving me the middle finger. This is his response to Mr. Simpson sending him a photo of the three of you having fun on the beach in Cancun, Robert added calmly. Did you send him that photo? I asked Michael, stunned. I agreed with his argument that he needed to win Andrew to get him to agree to a divorce without messy public proceedings, but that seemed to be going too far. I was going to frame this photo and put it on the mantelpiece. This is outrageous, Michael fumed as Bill and his mother laughed. The other two men snorted when they saw the photo. I will fight. He must have noticed the look on my face because he quickly corrected himself. We will fight. Seeing how excited Michael was, I suddenly doubted the love he so often told me about. I began to wonder if he knew how much Andrew's company would be worth when he tried so hard to seduce me. And then Robert's words came to me. With bitter realization, if I had just waited, I would have been incredibly rich and wouldn't have needed Michael to get me up. I would have been on top myself. I could have anyone. I felt nauseous and took a sip of water, noticing how much my hand was shaking. I was actually hoping you would say something like that, Mr. Simpson, Robert chuckled, pulling out another envelope. You will not represent anyone until the Bar Association completes its investigation and reinstates your license. You know how they feel about lawyers representing their lovers, and there are some other questions, but this is beyond the scope of this meeting. What? When did this happen? Michael asked. The notice was sent yesterday morning. I'm surprised you haven't heard about this yet. Oh yes, you were busy in Cancun. What other questions? Michael asked, concern clear on his face. Perhaps you could explain? Robert turned to the two men. With pleasure, said one of them, standing up. Who are you? Michael demanded. Harlan Jones, State's Attorney's Office, and this is Lieutenant Jennings from the State Bureau of Investigation. It is my understanding that you and Miss Coleman took the minor abroad without the prior consent of her father. This is true. Well, Michael muttered. Yes, it's true, I replied. Michael gave me an angry look, but I waved him off. It's true, and you know it. Everyone knows this. You said it would be best for Olivia to sever ties with her father as soon as possible. But you won't admit it, Michael hissed. You make them prove it. It's already been proven, Mr. Jones put in with a satisfied smile. The geolocation tag on the photo sent from your phone, the manifest of the private jet you arrived on, and eyewitness accounts. All this is already collected in a rather thick dossier. Turning pale, Michael turned to me. But you were at the same time with me, he said. Yes, I was, I admitted, seeing no reason to lie. It was unclear to me what all this meant, since this was supposed to be just an ordinary vacation. Michael said that trips like this happen all the time during divorces. Then you admit that you violated state laws regarding parental child abduction. This, by the way, is a Class D felony and carries a 5-year prison sentence and a $25,000 fine. Harlan turned to Lieutenant Jennings. Please, Lieutenant, arrest these two. Michael looked for a moment as if he wanted to lunge at the recorder, probably to break it. But the huge Jennings quickly stepped forward and Robert deftly removed the recorder from the table. With pleasure, said the large lieutenant, approaching us. Stand up, turn around, and put your hands behind your back. I had no choice but to obey his orders. I felt the handcuffs dig into my wrists as the lieutenant read my rights. Tears rolled down my face, and I turned to Robert. What about Olivia? Who will take care of her? Brother Andrew William, said Robert. The documents for guardianship have already been drawn up and submitted to the court. From this moment on, he is her legal guardian. No, I screamed. This can't be true. Everything should have been different. My life was about to get better. I was going to marry Michael and start a new, more successful life. Now I have lost everything. My husband, my daughter, my future, all my money. The lieutenant handcuffed Michael and led us to the exit, but Andrew's mother blocked the way. With hatred the likes of which I had never seen, she hit me in the face so hard that my eyes started to blur and there was blood in my mouth. Drew loved you with all his heart, and you trampled on him while he was dying. I hope you rot in hell, you trash, shouted the elderly woman. Did any of you see anything? The lieutenant asked calmly. Everyone present shook their heads in disdain. I didn't see anything either. Let's go, he commanded. Can I at least see my daughter? I asked, panic-stricken, afraid of what they might tell her. Not this time, madam, the lieutenant replied. He walked us through the office, and everyone could see that Michael and I were handcuffed. Everyone except Olivia. For this, I was grateful. I already knew better than to say anything in front of the lieutenant, so I remained silent, hoping that Michael would be able to get us out, but feeling a very bad feeling. We were forced into the back of a black SUV and then taken to the jail where we were separated and processed. Never in my life have I felt so humiliated. 2 hours later, I was dressed in a nasty orange jumpsuit and placed in a cell where I waited for what seemed like an eternity. A female deputy approached me and called my name. Looking at the clock, I realized that more than 6 hours had already passed. You have a visitor, she said as she handcuffed me. You won't cause me any trouble, will you? No, I answered quietly. She was large and reminded me of a boarding school landlady, a woman you don't want to mess with. Fine, because I wouldn't want to put chains on you. But if I have to, I'll wear it. Let's go. I followed her into a small room where I was chained to a table. A minute later, a man entered the room, John Haltner, an attorney from the North End Law Group and a friend of Michael. He put the case on the table and sat down next to her. How are you, Anne? He asked. It's been better, John. Thank you for coming. I was afraid that I would have to settle for a public defender. Michael called and asked me to represent you. Our partner, Sam Gregory, agreed to represent him, John said. I don't know how I can pay you for this, I said in a quiet voice. Don't worry about it now. Let's just take it one day at a time. I haven't had time to get acquainted with the whole case yet, but what I've already seen doesn't look very good. Did you have a temporary custody order when you took Olivia abroad? No, it wasn't. I left Andrew a copy of the divorce papers. The next day, he was officially served with a summons. No custody order, no restraining order, John clarified. No, I repeated. He sighed, shaking his head. This could become a serious problem. Listen, the state's attorney will be here soon to ask you some questions. I'll be there to support you. Be honest with him, answer questions, but do not give unnecessary information. Is it clear? Understood. Can you get me out of here? I'll do everything I can, but the government has frozen your assets and considers you and Michael flight risk. They insist on your detention until the end of the trial. Can I see Olivia? I asked in despair. I don't know, but we'll try to arrange a date. The door opened and Harlan Jones entered. With him was the woman I had seen in Robert's office, Jennifer, and another woman with a large box on wheels. Harlan Jones, State's Attorney's Office, and you. John Haltner. I represent Miss Coleman. John shook Harlan's hand. Fine. This is Jennifer Hawkins of Child Protective Services and Melissa Cantrell, also of the State's Attorney's Office. Shall we get started? We took our places at the table, and John opened his briefcase while Melissa opened the large drawer. She handed the thick folder to John. This is a copy of our file, Harlan said, inserting the tape into the audio recorder and turning on the record. I know you have already read your rights, Miss Coleman. Could you please provide your name and date of birth for the record? John nodded, and I complied with Harlan's request. Thank you. I understand that you have already admitted to violating state law regarding parental child abduction. I didn't make any such confessions. I cut him off sharply. I just admitted that I took my daughter on vacation to Cancun. You wrongly assumed that I admitted breaking the law. You can request Mr. Horton's recording if you want. Okay, Harlan replied, a little taken aback by my harsh tone. John smiled slightly and added, I'd like a copy of this recording too. We'll arrange it, Harlan said, turning his attention back to me. So you prefer to take the hard way. Okay, let's set some facts straight, shall we? Did you have a custody order signed by a judge? No, I didn't have such a decree, I answered. Did you have any restraining order or protection order preventing your now deceased husband from approaching you, your minor daughter, or your shared home? No, I didn't have such a warrant, I repeated again. Before you left, did you seek your husband's consent to take your daughter abroad for a month? No. Before the day you left, did you tell your husband that you intended to divorce him? No. Have you discussed this trip with anyone other than your husband? Yes, I answered. Harlan waited for more details, but I didn't add anything. Who exactly did you discuss this with, Miss Coleman? He continued. With Michael Simpson, and with my mother. Why with your mother? I asked her to look after Olivia while I got ready to tell Andrew about the divorce. Have you explained your intentions to her? Yes, I said quietly. Harlan nodded. Why did you deny Mr. Coleman the opportunity to communicate with his daughter? Michael said it would be easier for him and Olivia if the connection was severed right away. Understand, as far as I know, you have filed for divorce. Were you going to prevent Mr. Coleman from visiting? Don't answer that, John quickly intervened. Please stick to the established facts, Mr. Jones. Okay, established facts. Miss Coleman, who paid for your vacation to Cancun. It must have cost a lot to spend 30 days at a 5-star beach resort. One of Michael's business partners in South America, I replied. Is this the man? Harlan put a photograph of a man in a felt hat and sunglasses on the table. Maybe. I don't know for sure. Michael has many contacts all over the world. Do you know who this man is? Continued Harlan. Some Julio. I don't remember exactly. His name is Julio Cabrera. He is a known human trafficker and is associated with, let's say, illegal adult material. Wait a minute, John interjected, but Harlan cut him off. My heart began to pound. This all went much worse than I could have imagined. I was overcome with fear and felt dizzy. This man came into your hotel room several times, Miss Coleman. We have photos with dates and timestamps. You were also photographed having dinner and drinks with this person. Did you know what this man was doing when you danced with him? I was so shocked that I couldn't find the words, and I couldn't admit that I had met with Julio to discuss a backup plan in case Andrew decided to fight for a divorce. John spoke for me. What are you implying, Mr. Jones? I'm implying that this trip to Cancun was anything but an innocent vacation between two lovers out for some fun in the sun, Mr. Haltner. Miss Hawkins, would you like to join the conversation? Of course, Jennifer replied. Miss Coleman, I had a chance to talk with your daughter. She's a very smart girl. Yes, she is, I answered proudly. I think it's from my father. She told me some interesting stories about your holiday. She really enjoyed spending time on the beach and meeting different people. She also mentioned that you gave her something to help her sleep some nights. Olivia has had sinus problems for a long time, I explained. I gave her baby Benadryl to help her sleep. Suddenly, a plastic bag containing a small bottle of liquid appeared on the table. Have you used this product, Miss Coleman? Asked Harlan. Maybe. I'm not sure. We found this in your luggage. There are your fingerprints on the bottle. Do you know what's in it? Asked Harlan. I'm not a chemist, so no, I replied. Fortunately, we have chemists in the laboratory, and they were able to determine what was in the bottle. Yes, it contains all the ingredients you would expect to find in children's Benadryl, but it also contains traces of Rohypnol, Harlan said. After your arrest, I took Olivia to the hospital to have her blood tested, Jennifer added. Traces of this substance were found in her blood. The private investigators hired to follow you in Cancun documented several evenings in which you and Mr. Simpson left the hotel room without Olivia. At these moments, you were seen drinking, dancing, and having fun, leaving your daughter alone in the room. This is just my guess, but I think you gave your daughter a dose of the drug to help her sleep while you enjoyed your vacation. Honestly, I'm surprised your cocktail didn't kill her. Because of this, I recommend that the court permanently award custody of Olivia to Mr. William Coleman, and against you, they will bring charges of negligence, endangerment, and cruelty to a child, Jennifer said. I need to discuss with my client and review all the evidence you have before we proceed, John interrupted sternly, but his face turned red. I think it's a wise decision, lawyer, Harlan replied. Here's my business card if you want to discuss the deal. Don't wait too long. John took Harlan's business card and put it in his pocket. He waited until Harlan and both women had left before turning to me. He looked very worried, as if he was making an effort to restrain himself. And if you want my help, you need to be honest with me, John said firmly. Is there any truth to their accusations? Listen, John, I'm ashamed of some of the things I've done lately. Yes, we went to Cancun partly to meet with a man who offered to help. Put pressure on Andrew if he was fighting his divorce. But I didn't know that he was connected to human trafficking. Michael had connections all over the world, and yes, he admitted that some of his clients were people with dubious reputations, but I didn't know about this. And yes, I gave Olivia Benadryl to help with her sinusitis, but I didn't know it was mixed in. I was surprised when she fell asleep so quickly. This usually takes time. When she fell asleep, Michael and I quietly left the room, making sure the door was locked, and were sure that nothing would threaten her until we returned. Oh my God, Anne, how could you be so stupid? John reproached. Leaving Olivia alone in a hotel room in a foreign country, plotting something against your husband with an incomprehensible person. If this case goes to court, you will not only be sentenced, you will be thrown mud at every step of the way. Simply possessing such a substance can result in 3 to 5 years in prison. What about giving it to a child? Goodbye Christmas forever in this state. And what would the Mexican police do if they caught you with Rohypnol? I didn't know he was there, I blurted out, and then pulled myself together. What should I do? I begged. Let me examine all the materials they have collected. Our best chance is to stay out of court. You will go to prison, that's a fact. The only thing we can do is minimize the time you spend behind bars. I'm scared, John, I burst into tears. I didn't want it to turn out like this. Yes, I don't think that's what you wanted, but you'd better tell me the truth. I'm being honest, John. I promise, I replied. Fine, I'll see what I can do, he said, putting the documents away in his briefcase. I'll be in touch. Stay out of trouble. He walked to the door and called the guard, who entered the room and unfastened me from the table. The guard quietly escorted me back to my cell. On my way to the main hall, I noticed that many prisoners were looking at me with disgust. I didn't understand why, since I hadn't done anything to anyone here, and I asked the guard when she locked me in the cell. You haven't seen the news, have you? The guard asked with a slight grin. No, I didn't see it. The guard turned on the TV to a news channel where a group of experts were discussing my case. Among the participants was a local newspaper reporter who said she interviewed Andrew before his death. I felt truly sorry for him, the woman said. The caption under her image read, Patricia Dempsey, Daily Record. Why? Asked the host of the program. Imagine learning about an inoperable tumor that will kill you, and then you come home and your spouse says that he is taking the child and leaving for a month with his lover, Patricia said. God, this is terrible, one of the presenters responded. I think so too. This is not a man who gets drunk and cheats on his wife. This is Andrew Coleman, a man who donated a computer lab to the school with his own money and hires students from disadvantaged families for internships, added Patricia. He has been recognized by the local business community for his philanthropy several times. When will your article be published? Asked one of the presenters. Tomorrow morning, Patricia replied. We will definitely read it, the presenter assured, and then turned to the camera. This morning, Ann Coleman, Coleman's widow, was arrested on child abduction charges for allegedly taking her daughter to Cancun without her husband's knowledge or permission. If convicted, she faces up to 5 years in prison. Harlan Jones, one of the lead prosecutors, said the likelihood of additional charges was high. At that moment, I felt worse than I had ever felt in my life. This morning, I was on top of the world with the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Now look at me. I wanted to fall through the ground. No wonder everyone looked at me like I was a piece of crap. The more I thought about it, the more clearly I realized that I am this piece of shit. I drove myself into a trap. I buried my face in my hands and burst into tears. But my tears were selfish, and I knew it. At that moment, all I cared about was how I looked in front of society, and the fact that my husband died without saying goodbye to his daughter did not bother me. I wiped my face so I could look out of my small cell. What I saw scared me, the angry faces of the other prisoners looking at me with hatred. I felt completely unsafe at that moment and prayed that John would find a solution and quickly. My life had become hell, and my torment was just beginning. The next morning, the guard brought me a newspaper. There was an article about my case that showed me in an unsavory light. In the photo, I looked tired and exhausted, and in the photo, Andrew looked beaming as he received his award as a model citizen of the past year. I was cut out of that photograph. Next to the photos was an article by Patricia Dempsey talking about Andrew. I expected her to write glowingly about him, but I read things I never knew about. The article talked about his service in the Army in his youth. I knew Andrew served, but he never talked about that time. According to the article, his helicopter was shot down, and except for Andrew and one other soldier, everyone on board was killed. Although he himself was wounded, he pulled his comrade out of the wreckage, saving his life. For this, he was awarded a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. That fellow officer turned out to be none other than Robert Horton. The articles did their job. They portrayed Andrew as a beloved local hero who never spoke of his accomplishments, and me as a calculating, narcissistic mistress who denied her dying husband the opportunity to say goodbye to his daughter. With all the press coverage, I thought I'd be lucky if all they did to me was burn me at the stake and scatter my ashes in a landfill. I knew that I would not get a fair trial in this city, and I decided to discuss with John the possibility of moving the hearing to another location. My first meeting was scheduled for this morning. It was to determine whether I would be granted bail. I hoped that the court would at least give me that opportunity, but Harlan argued that I posed a potential flight risk. The judge agreed and kept me in custody until trial. After the hearing, I took a few seconds to mention the change of venue to John, who nodded and said he would look into the matter. After the hearing, I was transferred to another block, and that's when the real nightmare began. It seems that the other prisoners found out about me through news reports and have already made their verdict. The insults and threats were unpleasant, but the situation escalated when I went to get my food. One of the prisoners serving lunch looked at me with hatred, then collected a huge wad of saliva and directly spat it onto my tray, rendering the food inedible. To make it taste better, she grinned evilly, to loud laughter from the other prisoners. Unable to eat anything after this, I threw the tray in the trash and returned to my cell, to the displeasure of the guards. "What, have you decided to go on a hunger strike?" asked one of the guards. "You saw what that bitch did to my food," I said. "You stood nearby and did nothing." "Yes, I saw it. I was wondering how you would cope." "Here, eat this," she replied, taking out a packaged sandwich. "Don't be afraid, it's safe. I'll talk to that prisoner. But you need to be careful here. They don't like you here. At all. We do what we can, but sometimes bad things happen. You know what I mean?" "Understand. That is, I can be beaten or even killed, and no one cares." "That's it. If I were you, I would stay away from the others as much as possible, especially from that big girl with a tattoo on her face. Stay quiet and don't cause problems, and we, in turn, will protect you as best we can. Understood?" "Got it," I sighed. "Thanks for the warning." "You're welcome. And it's not about your white skin. I just don't need the pain and a lot of paperwork because of another death among prisoners. If my name appears in the headlines, I would prefer it to be on the occasion of winning the lottery," the guard said as she left the cell. Luckily, my parents visited me that same day. The meeting with my mother was very emotional, and we both cried. My father hugged me, but I saw that he was very upset. We talked about business, and they told me how Olivia was doing. It was hard for her, but she had already begun to get used to life with Bill. Our date ended after about an hour when the guard took me back to my cell. I spent the next 3 days in constant fear until a security guard approached me and told me that I had a visitor. I was delighted to see John in the meeting room. As before, the guard strapped me to the table and left, leaving us alone. "What happened?" I asked excitedly, hoping for good news. "The state attorney is willing to discuss the deal," John said. "But this may not be what you want." "If it helps me get out of here, I'm ready to do anything," I begged. "Tell me what happened." "There have been serious changes in the case. Now federal services are involved. Looks like your buddy was up to his neck in several human trafficking schemes." "What?" I exclaimed, not believing my ears. "Yes. Moreover, the state prosecutor believes that he was the one who mixed the drug into your daughter's medication. Of course, this does not justify your frivolity, but now the investigation believes that one of the purposes of the trip was to introduce Olivia to Julio as a possible future victim." "What?" I screamed. He motioned for silence. "Let the prosecutor explain everything. He and several federal agents are already here. They should be here any minute," John said. As if on cue, the door opened and Harlan entered the room, accompanied by 2 men in suits. The men said hello and took seats opposite us. "Miss Coleman, I hope you are being treated well," Harlan politely asked, although it seemed to me that he didn't care, but he had to ask. "Except for constant fear for my life, yes," I snapped. "They say there have been changes in the case." "Yes, that's true. We have found evidence that your boyfriend is deeply involved in illegal activities, and we believe that your daughter could be one of the potential victims," Harlan said. "This is Special Agent Mike McKenzie of the FBI and Agent Jack Carlson of CCTL. "CKTL?" I asked again. "Human Trafficking Center, Department of Homeland Security," Jack explained. "And you're going to arrest Michael Simpson?" I asked. "Yes," Mike replied. "We believe he is a central figure in a major international operation. The man you met in Cancun, Julio Cabrera, was just part of this network. We found correspondence between your friend and Cabrera where it was assumed that your daughter would be paid for. Services rendered against your husband. Were you aware of this?" "No, never," I breathed, not believing that Michael could harm my daughter. He always behaved with her so tenderly and caringly. Now that I knew he was going to hand Olivia over to Julio for some favor, I was angrier than ever. "What do you want me to do? Do you want me to testify against him?" "It's much more complicated, Miss Coleman," Jack said. "You were Simpson's personal assistant for 3 years, right?" "Yes, that's true," I confirmed. "And about 9 months as a mistress," he continued. "Yes," I repeated. So you are familiar with the details of his activities. It seems that not as much as I would like, I replied. But enough to understand his encrypted messages, right? Asked Jack. Yes, I understand, I nodded. Michael used a special system of abbreviations that was understandable only to those who knew his code well. Over the years, I have learned his codes and short notes. We want you to help us expose his global network. Do you agree? Asked Jack. The state attorney has authorized me to drop all charges against you if you agree to help, Harlan added. As long as you cooperate with federal authorities, these charges will not be brought. Will I be able to see my family? Daughter? I asked, feeling a ray of hope in my chest. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mike replied. The people your friend worked with are extremely dangerous. If they find out that you are helping us, your family, including your daughter and your in-laws, will be in mortal danger. For this to work, Miss Coleman must disappear. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mike continued. So, some kind of witness protection program, I asked, trying to comprehend what I had heard. It's a much more complicated situation, Jack replied. You will not only be protected, you will have to actively work with us to dismantle the global human trafficking network. Of course, you will be given a new identity, and we will take care of your safety and the safety of your family. What do you say to the press? How do you explain all this? I asked, worried about how it would be presented to the public. This is our concern. For everyone around her, Miss Coleman will be in custody as part of a major investigation. After some time, it will be announced that Ann Coleman committed suicide out of despair over the loss of her daughter. Anita Coles will appear in her place, Jack explained. As long as you cooperate with us, we will provide you with protection, Mike added, and no charges will be brought against you. Perhaps one day, when this is all over, you will be able to see your daughter again. This is a high price, but it could be higher, much higher. Okay, I answered after a few seconds of thinking. The situation was not ideal, but it was much better than being in prison. It would also give me a chance to get back at Michael for putting my daughter in danger. I agree. Great, Mike said, laying out several documents in front of me. If you sign these papers, we will begin the process. I carefully studied the documents and showed them to John. There was nothing suspicious about them, and I signed them. Jack went to the door and called the guard, who entered the room. Here are the documents about the transfer into custody. Miss Coleman is now in the federal department, and she is coming with us, Jack said. The security guard checked the papers, then radioed them over. We heard the answer, and the guard nodded. Fine. Follow me, please. I need to formalize her release, the guard said. When I was unstrapped from the table, we followed the guard into the corridor. The registration process took a couple of hours, after which I was finally able to take a hot shower, put on the clothes I was arrested in, and feel a little more human. Once on the street in front of the prison building, I looked back at the massive structure. Goodbye, Ann Coleman, I thought. Hello, Anita Coles. And may God have mercy on that piece of shit called Michael Simpson, because I certainly won't. 13 years later. I lay down on the small bed in my room and let the air from the ceiling fan wash over me. While waiting for sleep, I took out a yellowed letter from my biological father, written so long ago, and read it for the 100th time. My dear Olivia, the letter began, I hope this letter finds you safe and in good health. I wish I could hug you one more time and tell you how much I love you and how much you mean to me. Unfortunately, that won't happen. I promised your mother that I would tell you what happened and what kind of person he was. She chose your new father for the role, so here it is. The day you left for Cancun with your mother and Michael Simpson, I found out that I had an inoperable brain tumor. The doctor said it was aggressive, and I probably wouldn't live a month. I tried to tell your mother about it, but she brushed it off, saying that I would survive. She also said that it would be better if I cut off all ties with you as quickly as possible. This, according to her, was Michael's idea. While you were in Cancun, a private detective collected all the possible information about your mother's boyfriend, and what he found out was not at all encouraging. Your mother said that he had great connections, and she was right. Politicians, judges, businessmen, everyone was in his circle. But among them, there were also very dark personalities, those who could easily take advantage of a young girl like you. Working with my lawyer, Robert Horton, we did everything we could to protect you from Simpson's influence, and I can only hope we succeeded. I also did everything possible to provide for you financially for life. I hope you had a good childhood and that your Uncle Bill was able to get custody of you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to see you grow into the wonderful woman I know you have become, but I want you to know that in the few years that we spent together, I loved you more than life itself. With love and tenderness, Dad. With tears in my eyes, I carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope before carefully placing it in my bag. Dad, the man I now call Dad, who is actually my Uncle Bill, gave me this letter on my 18th birthday, along with a ledger that contained more numbers than I could have ever imagined. Dad explained that my father worked hard, made good investments, and sold his company before he died so that I would receive the fruits of his labor, not my mother. Dad was a trustee of the trust with Mr. Horton. All my educational expenses were covered, and I received a monthly stipend that increased with age. Management of the trust will pass to me when I turn 30. I haven't cried for my father in a long time, but then I couldn't hold it in. I remembered that trip to Cancun so long ago. I remember how I didn't understand why Dad couldn't come with us. Mom gave some excuse and said that maybe he would join later if he could take time off from work. But this never happened. I begged her to let me talk to him, but she always said he was too busy to talk to me. Now this lie tormented my soul. I had a good time swimming in the ocean and meeting all sorts of interesting people. There was one man named Julio who Michael said was his friend. It was he who took that photo of us on the beach, the same one that Michael sent to Dad. Julio seemed like a nice enough person, but something about him made me nervous. Mostly I had a good time, but I missed my dad terribly. There were several nights when I heard Mom and Michael in their room, and I knew that she was doing with Michael what she had only done with Dad before. I was only 8 years old, but I was not stupid. I'm pretty sure my dad wouldn't like it. There were other nights when I started having problems with my nose, and my mother would give me a small dose of medicine. Usually it helped me fall asleep, but this time there was something different. I often woke up in the morning confused, not remembering what happened during the night, and it scared me. When we returned, Dad was not at home. Mom said he was probably working, so I went across the street to my best friend to tell her about the trip. Soon my mother called me and said that we needed to go to Robert Horton, Dad's friend and lawyer. When we arrived at Robert's office, I was asked to speak with a woman named Jennifer. Jennifer was a kind woman with a pleasant smile, and we had a good conversation about my trip. Then she said she wanted to make sure I was okay and took me to the hospital where the doctors took my blood. I was a little nervous about being away from my mom, but Jennifer was very caring and seemed genuinely interested, so I followed her without making a scene. When Jennifer brought me back to Robert's office, Mom and Michael were no longer there. Instead, Robert, Grandma, and Uncle Bill were waiting for me. They sat me down and explained that Dad died due to some kind of illness in his head. They hugged me as I started to cry. I never had time to say goodbye to him and tell him that I love him. But this was not the end. I was also told that Mom and Michael did something wrong by taking me away from Dad without his permission. They advised that the police would need to speak with them, and they would likely be out for some time. At this time, I was offered to live with Uncle Bill and Aunt Lisa. I didn't mind because I loved them very much and always had a good time with my cousin Maria, who was a year older than me. A day or two later, I saw something on TV that really bothered me. They talked about my mother and said terrible things. At the same time, Dad was called a hero and a pillar of society. Uncle Bill turned off the TV and sat down next to me. "Why do they say such terrible things about Mom?" I asked. "They probably don't know her like we do," Uncle Bill answered. "Don't pay attention to all this, okay?" A few days later, Uncle Bill announced when he returned from work that Mom had been taken into federal custody. "What does it mean?" I asked. I was scared. I lost my dad and didn't want to lose my mom. I don't know for sure, he said. Maybe they need her testimony to put some very bad people in jail. Now, knowing what I know, I understand that he was trying to assuage my pain since I had not been allowed to see her since that day in Robert's office. Will I ever see her? I asked. I was scared to hear the answer. I don't know. I hope so, answered Uncle Bill. Let's see. But I never saw her again. Shortly after Uncle Bill made this announcement, we received word that Mom had committed suicide while in federal prison. Now I am left without parents, an orphan. It was a very lonely word. My life seemed to end, and for several days I could not calm down, crying non-stop. We had just buried Dad, and now Mom was dead too. I spent days in tears, finding no consolation. Everyone around me tried to calm me down, but to no avail. More than once I thought that the only way to see them again was to die. In my childhood mind, I imagined that if I died too, then we could be together again. Luckily, Uncle Bill and Aunt Lisa understood what was happening to me and found help for me. It took months and many long conversations with Dr. Katie and Pastor Jacob, but I was finally able to move forward. However, something was still missing. And then Uncle Bill and Aunt Lisa came to my aid again, only this time together with Maria. Darling, you know that Aunt Lisa and I love you very much, right? Uncle Bill asked. Yes. And Maria loves you too. And I love you too, I replied. So, since your parents are gone, we would like to become a replacement for you, if you don't mind, said Aunt Lisa. What do you mean? I asked. We would like to adopt you to be our child. We want to be your new mom and dad, Uncle Bill said. And that means you will become my little sister, Maria added with a smile. I always dreamed of a sister. Will you be my big sister? I asked. The idea of having parents and an older sister again seemed good to me. Yeah, wouldn't that be great? Said Maria. The more I thought about it, the better it seemed. That would be great, I said. Do you promise that you won't leave me? We'll never leave you, darling, Uncle Bill promised. And so it turned out that my Uncle Bill and Aunt Lisa became new parents for me, and my cousin Marie became my new big sister. That day I smiled with joy for the first time in months. Now I was no longer an orphan. From that moment on I had a good childhood. Of course, there were minor fights from time to time, but we always ended the day with smiles, hugs, and kisses. My new mom and dad were wonderful, loving parents, and Marie was the best big sister anyone could ask for. We shared all our secrets with each other and even went on double dates a few times, much to the displeasure of our dates. Dad loved going to the shooting range and often took Marie and me with him. He taught us how to safely handle guns, and when we were older, he gave us each a .22 caliber rifle. He insisted that we take a gun safety course before allowing us to shoot and kept a close eye on us on the range. I liked the shooting a lot, and I turned out to be really good at it. Dad was amazed as he watched me hit the center of the target with a bullet over and over again. Marie was also good, but not as good as me. Damn it, we have our own little Annie Oakley here, Dad declared proudly, looking at my target. Do you want to try shooting with my Savage? Of course I wanted to. He explained to me how to load the rifle and carefully watched me take aim. The rifle had much more recoil than my .22, but the feeling was incredible, especially when I saw that I hit the center at 200 yards. Dad screamed with joy when he saw the target. Marie gasped, looking at her through binoculars. Remind me never to make you angry, sis, she joked. By this time, a group of people had gathered around us to congratulate me on my marksmanship. You know, the local school has a shooting team, one man said. You should try to get there. I'm sure you will succeed. Yes, why are you so sure? Dad asked. I'm the coach of the team, Dean Allred, the man said, smiling broadly and shaking Dad's hand. We're always looking for new talent. What's your name, young lady? Olivia Coleman, I replied. Coleman, related to Andrew Coleman. I knew that the library had been renamed in honor of my father after the news of his death. I looked at my dad nervously and was grateful when he answered for me. Andrew was my brother, Dad said quietly but proudly. He was a good man, your brother, Dean said, nodding. Yes, he was. The best, Dad answered. Well, Miss Coleman, come see me as soon as possible. You know where the school shooting range is, don't you? Yes, sir, I know, I replied. Great, I'll be glad to see you soon, Dean said with an even wider smile. He shook Dad's hand and left. I didn't know then that this meeting would determine the course of my life for many years to come. The next day of school, I met with Dean, and he showed me around the shooting range. We discussed range safety, and he showed me the sporting rifles that were used for competition. These rifles were much more expensive than my .22 that my dad gave me. Would you like to try it? Dean asked. Of course, I replied. I put on my shooting jacket, glasses, and headphones. Dean showed me how to get into a prone position and how to load a 5-round magazine. He watched as I took the first shot. The bullet went above and to the right of the target, so I unloaded the weapon and adjusted the front sight as he showed me. When Dean nodded, I reloaded the magazine and fired the remaining rounds, hitting the target squarely in the center. I unloaded the weapon and Dean checked that there were no rounds left in the barrel. He examined the target and was impressed. Impressive, he said. We can work with this. Can you come here after school for an hour 3 times a week? Yes, sir, I can, I assured him. Great, Dean said. Of course, you know that you will have to maintain good grades if you want to stay on the team. Yes, I thought so, I said. I understood that extracurricular activities are a privilege and academics should come first. Have your parents sign the consent form and bring it here. Welcome to the team, Dean said. We shook hands, and I almost flew on wings on the way home. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Mom asked. Yes, I'm sure, I replied. Mom looked at Dad, and I noticed their silent conversation with my eyes. Dad studied the documents carefully and nodded. Okay, we'll let you do this, but only if you keep your grades up, okay, young lady, he asked. Thank you, Daddy, I love you, I exclaimed, hugging him. When he let me go, I hugged my mother, telling her that I loved her too. For the next 3 years, I was on the team, improving my skills with a variety of weapons, from rifles to pistols and shotguns. I enjoyed competitive rifles the most, and I was almost always in the top 10, leading my team from one win to the next. My senior year was my best year in high school, and I led the team to victory at the state championship, beating my closest competitor in long throw by a significant margin. We won the competition, and I received a trophy for my achievements. As I was cleaning my rifle after the competition, a man approached me. Miss Coleman, he asked. I looked up to see a strongly built man in uniform, with ribbons covering almost the entire side of his chest. Yes, I answered. I'm Sergeant Major Brett Wilkerson, US Army recruiter. I saw you shoot today. I have to say, I haven't seen such marksmanship in a long time. Congratulations. Thank you, Sergeant Major, I replied politely, impressed by his posture and form. Do you know what you plan to do after graduation? He asked. I haven't decided yet, I replied, which was true. By this time, I had already received my first trust fund payment, but I still had not decided which college I wanted to attend. You have natural talent. It would be a shame if it went to waste. How about getting paid for what you do so well? I didn't expect such an offer and didn't even know what to think. Hitting paper targets and metal discs is one thing, but shooting at living people is a completely different matter. You mean, like a sniper? I asked carefully. Something like that, yes. The Army spends a lot of money on training its snipers. Apparently, it comes naturally to you. I didn't know women could be snipers in the Army, I replied. We didn't have this before, but over the past few years, the Army has changed its attitude towards many things. By the way, did you know that some of the best snipers in history were women? No, I didn't know, I admitted, somewhat surprised. Of course, you will need to undergo additional training and qualify, like everyone else. But you seem to be in excellent physical shape, good with weapons, and I think you are capable of many things if you set your mind to it." "What will I get in return?" I asked. "Give us 4 years, and the Army will pay for your college education, provide veterans benefits, and you will have the satisfaction of knowing you've done it all on your own. What do you say?" "I need to think, Sergeant Major. Talk to my parents," I replied. "Of course. This is not a decision that is made hastily," he said, handing me a business card. "Think about it, Miss Coleman. Talk to your parents. Then come to my office, and we'll discuss everything in more detail, okay?" "Okay," I replied, taking the business card. "It was nice to meet you, Miss Coleman, and congratulations again," the sergeant major said before leaving. "Mom, Dad, and Marie took me to a restaurant to celebrate my victory, but my thoughts were not on the celebration. I thought about what the sergeant major said about the possibility of an independent path. The more I thought about it, the more I liked it. I know you, honey. What are you thinking about?" Dad said when we returned home. "You've been surprisingly quiet since the competition." I told him about the sergeant major's visit and what he offered me. "I think I want to do this," I said quietly. "You and my other father served in the Army. I would like to follow in your footsteps." "I appreciate that, honey, but you have to understand that recruiters are notorious for promising one thing and then saying something else. I wouldn't want your hopes to be dashed. Besides, do you really want to be a sniper?" "I feel like this is my purpose, Dad. I can't explain it." He looked at me for a long time, but I held his gaze. "You understand that in the Army, in combat, the targets are people, and your job is to kill them. This is a heavy burden for any person." I nodded, remembering all the classic movies we watched together. The Longest Day was one of my favorites. And the targets shoot back, dear. You could get seriously hurt or even killed. Dad was always a cheerful person, but I also saw his serious side many times. However, I have never seen him so serious. I thought about it and then made a decision. If something happens to me, I have my trust fund. If something goes wrong, I can decide who gets the money, right? His eyes sparkled, and he said, "That's right." Then he shook his head slightly, as if in embarrassment. "But what about college? You have enough money in your trust to go to school anywhere," Dad insisted. "I know, but I want to achieve something in life on my own. You always taught me that the best things in life are those that we achieve ourselves," I objected. "Did you really listen to me?" Dad smiled, and we both laughed. "I always listened to you, even when you thought I couldn't hear," I said. "I just want you to be proud of me." "We're always proud of you, Olivia," Dad said. "And I'm sure your other dad would be proud of you too. Do you really want this?" "Yes, I want to," I answered. "Then let's go talk to Mom." I had the same conversation with my mom, but this time my dad was on my side. After wiping away my tears, my mother admitted that I was already an adult and had the right to make my own decisions. She didn't like what I decided, but she was still proud of me. Marie, who had just started college, felt the same way. 2 days after that, Mom and Dad went with me to the recruiter's office and talked to Sergeant Major Wilkerson. By the end of the meeting, I signed the documents and was ready to go to training immediately after graduating from school. My boyfriend Larry Green was not happy with my decision. We didn't make any clear plans, but we discussed the possibility of going to college together. It was impossible now, but I liked Larry and I thought we could handle a long-distance relationship. That night, we decided to give each other our innocence. I insisted on using a condom, and luckily my mom put me on birth control when I turned 18. We were awkward with each other's clothes, but it worked out. I can't say that it was the best experience in my life, but I didn't have anything to compare it to. However, it was an experience I will never forget. The Young Fighters course turned out to be not as difficult as I expected, mainly thanks to my dad's wise advice. I graduated at the top of my class and was prouder of my first badge than anything else. After a short visit to the family, I spent almost several months moving from one training course to another. Continuing my training included an advanced infantry course, which was a real challenge, but I did it brilliantly, even beating some of the guys who saw themselves as modern-day Rambos. After that, I officially qualified as an 11B, becoming an infantry soldier. I was assigned to an infantry battalion, and it was there that I learned how to parachute out of perfectly serviceable aircraft and earned my parachutist badge. After this, I was sent to a series of tests that included psychological selection. Naturally, I confirmed my qualifications as a shooting expert, receiving an almost perfect result. Physically, I was in great shape, partly because I didn't smoke or drink alcohol. My results in physical training were consistently very high, and often I even outperformed my male colleagues. By the end of my first year of service, I received the rank of junior specialist and finally gained admission to the sniper course. As for Larry, our relationship began to fade a little. He met a nice girl in college, and honestly, I felt like I grew out of that relationship. We said goodbye via email, wishing each other all the best in life. I applied for the Scout Sniper course, and that's where my skills really came into play. To say that it was easy would not be true, it was quite the opposite. Firstly, I was the only girl in the class, and secondly, among my classmates there were experienced veterans, many of whom had already served in special forces. They looked down on me, thinking I was there just for the diversity, and I had to work hard to earn their respect. Most of them were confident that I would wear out on the first day, which included testing our physical capabilities and shooting and reconnaissance skills. I passed the test, but some of the guys, on the contrary, failed, which surprised the rest. The rest of the training was interesting for me, although not at all an easy ride. The men in class continued to make fun of me, but one day it ended when Special Forces Sergeant Aaron Harker approached me after class at my locker. "How are you so good with this M110?" he asked, referring to the rifle we used during this phase of training. "It's simple, Sergeant Harker," I replied. "I'm just imagining that I'm aiming for your things. I think if I can hit a target that small, I can certainly hit anything at 800 yards. Harker's grin disappeared, and the other guys next to him chuckled. After this, I had no more problems. By the time the course ended, several guys started approaching me for advice, including Harker himself. By the end of the course, almost a third of the students had dropped out, and the rest were looking for any way to improve their results. After graduation, I returned to the battalion, which was just preparing to be sent to the Middle East. It was there that I first received a confirmed combat hit. Not all of my targets were living soldiers. Sometimes I was assigned to carry out reconnaissance missions and transmit information to battalion headquarters. On other occasions, I was sent to destroy certain enemy equipment. It's amazing how you can disable an entire radar installation with one single shot at an optical fiber. By the end of the second year of service, I received the rank of specialist. One day, when I returned from a mission with my observer, the first sergeant called me into the headquarters tent, saying that the commander wanted to see me. When I arrived to the captain, he released me and handed me a set of papers. "You have been transferred, Specialist Coleman. You are to return to Fort Moore immediately," he said, referring to the base formerly known as Fort Benning. "Pack your things. Your flight is in 2 hours. Any questions?" "Why am I being transferred, sir?" I asked. "I don't know, Specialist. These orders came from the very top, so I'm not supposed to ask questions. I nominated you for an award for excellent service here. You did an excellent job, and you will be missed. I hope we meet again in the future," he said, shaking my hand. "Thank you, sir," I replied. I packed my things, said goodbye to my fellow soldiers, wishing them good luck, and headed to the transport plane with orders in hand. When I arrived at Fort Moore, I was immediately taken to another part of the base, where I met the team I still work with. The person in charge of the team was a bearded man in a green uniform with no insignia. He took my orders and examined me. "Specialist Coleman arrived as ordered, sir," I reported, saluting clearly. The man chuckled and nodded. "You are the same Coleman, the miracle girl that Washington promised me. I hope you really are as good as they say." "Wonder Girl, where did this come from?" Stunned, I asked the question, "What are my orders, sir?" Your orders are to do as I say, and the first thing you will do is forget that sir and all other formalities. Do you see any insignia on this uniform? No, so how should I address you? I asked. Call me boss. That's what everyone calls me here. Okay, boss. Why was I pulled out of my unit? Why am I here? Really? Someone in Washington really appreciates your work. I can't say more until we leave the base. That will be tomorrow morning. In the meantime, get rid of everything that screams us Army shoulder straps, insignia, dog tags, stripes, everything that can lead to your name. Got it? Leave your equipment here. Everything you need will be provided, and you can collect your things when we return. From now on, you are a ghost. Where are we going? To the south. We will have a short mission and then return in a few days. You are not to tell anyone about this under any circumstances. Understand? Got it, boss, I said. Will you allow me to go? You're not a child, Coleman. You know what to do. Now go do it. I left the tent and followed another stern soldier to the small tent that was assigned to me. This is yours, he said, holding the tent flap open. Dinner at 18:30. Thank you, I replied and entered the small tent. Inside there was a cot, a small table, and a kerosene lamp. I put the equipment on the cot, took off my uniform, and began to follow the boss orders, removing all the stripes and insignia from the camouflage. It took some time, but finally the form was ready. In the evening, I joined the boss and the others in the large tent, where a dinner of field rations awaited us. The other 5 men looked as hardened and silent as the boss and paid little attention to me. So, said the boss, having finished eating, departure is at 4:30. Pack only the essentials. Take things for a couple of days. Leave your cosmetics and perfume here, Wonder Girl. And you're all right, women's affairs no. No. What about you? I answered sharply, irritated by his patronizing tone. He grinned, and the others grinned back. Just be here at 4 o'clock. Don't be late. I won't be late. I headed back to my tent when suddenly one of the other men, Smitty, approached me. What do you need? I asked angrily. Nothing, he answered calmly. Just don't take things too personally, okay? The boss lost a lot of people on these missions, so he doesn't get too close to the new ones. Thought it would be useful for you to know. Thanks for the information, I replied. I better get ready and sleep for a couple of hours. Yeah, okay, he said and walked away. I finished my preparations, took from my bag only the essentials for a couple of days, and added a letter from my dad to it as a talisman. The next morning I was at the main tent at 3:55, waiting for Boss and the others. When they appeared, Boss handed me a pistol and 2 loaded magazines, then took a sniper rifle with a scope out of the box and handed it to me along with some ammunition. I don't like using a weapon that I haven't shot before. How can I be sure that it works as it should? I asked. Because I said so, he replied sharply and tossed me a wide-brimmed camouflage hat. Leave the army here. Let's go. We climbed into 2 Humvees and rushed to the airfield, where an unmarked transport plane was waiting for us. We boarded, and the plane headed south. Once we reached cruising altitude, the boss gathered us for a briefing. This is your goal, he said, handing me a photograph of a middle-aged Hispanic man. My breath caught when I looked at the photo. I had seen this man before, when I was only 8 years old. He looked much the same as he did then, only he was older and a little plumper. Are you okay, Wonder Girl? Asked the boss. You turned as pale as a ghost. Who is this man? I asked, trying not to show that I recognized him. His name is Julio Cabrera. He deals with all sorts of nasty things, illegal substances, human trafficking, everything he does. They've been trying to catch him for the last 20 years, but he always escapes. This time he's not interested in being captured anymore, said the boss. Can you handle it? No, I can handle it, I answered coldly. You better handle it. Smitty will be your lookout. The others are counting on you to take him out. He usually goes out for an early morning swim with 1 or more of his girlfriends. We don't want any accidental casualties, so you'll have to be extra careful. Once he is eliminated, we will rush in and rescue the hostages." "Approximately how many hostages, boss?" asked one of the men. "We estimate about 5 women and up to 20 children," boss replied. "How many guards does he have at his ranch?" asked another. "Intelligence says up to 15, so we'll need to act fast, hit hard, and get out of here as quickly as possible. Study the photos. I'll give you all the details tonight when we get there." During the flight, I fell asleep and woke up like everyone else. When we landed, we were driven in 2 Humvees to a temporary camp where we split into small groups and settled in for the night. The boss gathered us in a common room and gave us a detailed briefing. I was impressed by the thoroughness of the plan. What I liked even more was that my position was not only above the level of the ranch, but also facing the sun so that it would shine on my back and not in my eyes. Studying the map, I estimated that my target would be approximately 750 meters away. We had a light snack after the briefing and then went to our rooms. Lying on my bed, watching the fan spin overhead, I felt a little like Martin Sheen at the beginning of Apocalypse Now. I didn't hit the mirror like his hero, but I thought about how my life would turn out after the service and whether I would ever be able to live a normal life with ordinary relationships. The boss wanted me to study Giulio's photo closely, but I didn't need to. His face was already forever etched in my memory from the month I spent in Cancun with my mother and her then-boyfriend. I couldn't remember him doing anything specific against me, but I did remember how uncomfortable I felt in his presence. Finally, feeling tired, I set the alarm on my watch and fell asleep. The next morning, we gathered in the main tent and had a quick breakfast of eggs, bacon, and coffee. Having finished, the boss gave final instructions and asked if anyone had any questions. "It's time to move out. Saddle up the gear, everyone," he commanded. When we got to my drop-off point, boss motioned for Smitty and I to head out. We left the truck and, without saying a word, headed towards the target. I studied the map and knew where to go, so I took charge. The climb through the jungle was steep, and by the time we got to the position, Smitty was breathing heavily. I immediately prepared to shoot, and Smitty set up a telescopic sight. The rifle the boss gave me looked a little worse for wear, but the scope was the most advanced I'd ever used and was equipped with a laser rangefinder. I didn't really need it, but it was nice to have the option. "My distance is 746 meters, I told Smitty. 746 meters, accepted, he replied. There was a slight breeze blowing from the mountain, but it should not have affected the shot. I loaded the rifle with 5 rounds and prepared to fire. "This is for you, Dad," I whispered. "What?" Smitty asked. "Nothing," I replied. I looked at my watch. I had a minute left before the team arrived at the scene. I looked through the electronic sight again and saw Giulio, completely naked, climb into the pool, not suspecting that his life was about to end. At each corner of the pool stood a guard with a rifle slung over his shoulder. It is clear that no one was expecting problems. Rather, they were waiting for a show. A curvy woman with long dark hair climbed onto Giulio's lap, and I saw him smile as she sat on him. She wriggled back and forth, and I thought that Giulio was about to experience the pleasure of passing away and achieving the emotions of pleasure at the same time. Mentally, I ordered the fool to get out of the way so I could see him properly. Giulio threw his head back, moving in time with the woman on his lap, and I took advantage of the moment when he opened his mouth, leaning back. This was my chance. I pulled the trigger, and a second later the bullet hit him. The woman jumped up and screamed, and Giulio's lifeless body sank into the pool. One of the guards turned around and raised his weapon. I reloaded my rifle and shot him in the head, then repeated it twice more while the remaining guards panicked, scanning the jungle around them instead of taking cover. The last guard escaped, disappearing into the bushes along the path leading back to the estate. By this time, I had already heard shots from the mansion and realized that the team had reached their goal. Smitty said on air that one security guard was heading back from the pool. "It's time for us to leave," Smitty said. I looked around. There was too much foliage around the building to shoot reliably, and the road was almost invisible, so I couldn't provide cover. Accepted, I whispered, collecting the shell casings. Smitty reported the situation. We quickly collected our equipment and headed to the collection point. When we arrived, I noticed the lead vehicle approaching us. When it slowed down a bit, we quickly jumped inside. No one said anything as we were driven to the airfield, where a transport plane was waiting for us. I quickly counted everyone. Half the team, and no one seemed injured, although one of the guys had 2 dents in his vest that he was picking at irritably. 2 women and 7 children huddled in the center, as protected as they could be without armor. The women were silent, confused, and the children were quietly sobbing in fear. Memories of when I was 8 came up, and my heart sank at the thought of what they must have been through. The boss and 2 others took the hostages inside the plane, while the rest of us set up a security perimeter. We couldn't allow any vigilantes to shoot anyone in the back or damage the engine. As soon as the last civilian boarded, we also boarded. The engines began to rumble, the plane took off and rushed north. We went low and fast, avoiding radar. Each turbulence drew gasps from the hostages. The boss sat down next to me, and I looked out the window at the villages below. "Not bad, Wonder Girl," he said with a slight smile. "I'll be glad to see you on the team at any time." "Thank you, boss," I replied. "My name is Jackson, Ryan Jackson." He extended his hand. "Olivia Coleman," I said, accepting his hand. "Nice to meet you, Olivia Coleman," he replied. "Nice to meet you, Ryan Jackson. So how did we cope?" "Everyone got out and no one was hurt. Except for the bad guys, thanks mostly to you," Ryan replied. "By the way, when we get back to Moore, there will be transport there to take you to Washington. Looks like someone wants to meet you." "About who?" I asked. "My boss," he said. "And now yours too. Get some rest, Olivia. You deserve it." "Thank you," I replied when he left. I closed my eyes and fell asleep, dreaming of happier times, mostly of my own father pushing me on the swing. I woke up as the plane began its descent toward Fort Moore. After boarding, the women and children were escorted onto buses that took them to the base hospital. We said goodbye to each other and started packing our things. Ryan walked me to the private jet that would take me to Washington. "It was a pleasure working with you, Olivia," he said, shaking my hand. "I'm sure we'll see each other again." "And it was my pleasure, Ryan," I replied. "You better hurry up. The bosses don't like to be kept waiting," he added with a smile. I climbed on board, and the orderly escorted me to my seat. My equipment was already neatly folded on the seat opposite. My blue army uniform was neatly ironed and hung on a hanger. I looked at the orderly, who said that I could take a shower and change clothes in the toilet room as soon as the plane reached altitude. Of course, I thought, the boss probably wouldn't want to see me in a dirty field uniform. A few minutes after takeoff, the orderly signaled to me and left the cockpit, giving me the privacy I needed. I took a quick shower, then changed clothes. The flight was surprisingly smooth after the frantic race we had made, escaping from whatever country it was. I applied minimal makeup, combed my hair, and examined myself in the mirror. I liked what I saw and went into the passenger compartment. The orderly saw that I had changed my clothes and motioned for me to move on. I followed him, and he knocked on the door of a small cabin. A woman's voice was heard from inside, and the orderly opened the door. "Specialist Coleman is ready to see you, Miss Coles," the man announced. "Let her in," came the confident answer from inside. "Yes, ma'am," replied the orderly. "Miss Coles will see you now, Specialist Coleman," he added, stepping aside. "Thank you," I replied and entered the small cabin. For a moment, I was frozen in amazement. The woman sitting at the small table was an older version of my birth mother. I had no doubts left. I lived with her for 8 years, and her photograph hung on the wall of my room all these years. Gray hair was already visible, and wrinkles appeared on her face, but it was just her. I didn't know what to do, hug her or hit her. Army discipline instantly came into play within me, and I stood at attention. "Specialist Coleman, reporting under your orders, ma'am." I saluted clearly, although my teeth were clenched. It's nice to meet again after all these years, Olivia, she said with a smile. Have a seat. We have a lot to discuss, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions for me. Yes, ma'am, that's true, I replied, sitting down on the offered chair. Let me say right away, Olivia, I think the Army did an excellent job raising you. You look great in uniform, and I'm proud of everything you've accomplished. Thank you, I replied quietly. I wish I could be near you. I really wanted to, but— Why? I interrupted her. Why? Why what? Asked Anita. Why did you leave my father, knowing that he was dying? Why didn't you let me say goodbye to him? I asked. These are fair questions. Let me tell you a story before you judge me. I admit that I have made serious mistakes. Mistakes that brought me to where I am now. I was a stupid, selfish, narcissistic fool who succumbed to the charms of the man I thought was best for both of us. He was rich and powerful, with an incredible network of connections around the world. But I had no idea what he actually did. I didn't know your father was even richer than Michael. All bills were always paid on time, and we lived frugally, at least in my opinion. Michael convinced me that he was just a computer repairman. Now, looking back, I understand that he was just after your father's money and wanted to drag us into a human trafficking network. He constantly humiliated your father and gradually made me believe his words. When your father started having headaches, that put an end to our intimacy. Due to pain and constant illness, he could not be with me as before. I was too selfish to care about his health. I was young, beautiful, and believed that I deserved attention and pleasure, and Michael only intensified his attack. He convinced me to divorce your father and filed for divorce himself. He said it would be best if we completely cut off all ties with your father. The day I took you to your grandmother was the same day I told him I was leaving. Your father said he was dying, but I didn't believe it, thinking he was just trying to make me feel guilty. I didn't find out the truth until I returned. I swear I didn't know he was actually dying. I'm bitterly sorry for what I did, Olivia, about hurting you and Andrew. I was accused of taking you out of state without your father's permission or notice. They also accused me of other crimes. I was considered Michael's accomplice. Investigators found that Michael dealt with terrible people associated with illegal drugs and human trafficking. One of those people was Giulio Cabrera, the man you shot today. I listened, gritting my teeth, trying not to give in to the emotions that flared up in my soul, in which anger and pain were mixed. I was given a choice: cooperate with federal authorities to help take down Michael's network, or spend years in prison. They needed me because of my knowledge of the network and my ability to decipher its encryption and codes. I agreed, but it meant that Anna Coleman had to disappear forever. This meant that I would never be able to see you again. This was my punishment. You can't imagine how much I've missed you all these 15 years. You have no idea what it means to be told that you are an orphan, I replied with venom in my voice, barely holding back the tears and the flaring pain that threatened to tear me apart. A child who has no parents. I even thought about committing suicide to be reunited with you and Dad. Fortunately, Mom and Dad helped me in time. Aunt Lisa and Uncle Bill adopted me, you know. Anita looked at me, stunned, without moving her gaze. Her eyes widened and her hands clasped tightly together when she heard about my suicidal thoughts. Yes, I know, she said quietly, and I'm glad they did it. I followed your life, from the last school competitions and beyond. Yes, I was there, in the stands, and it was I who asked the sergeant major to talk to you. So, does that mean I'm a sniper because of you? I asked, feeling the sharpness in my voice. No, you are a sniper because you worked hard to earn that title. All we could do was open the door, but you achieved everything yourself. I have followed your military career and am very impressed with you. When the opportunity arose, I got you assigned to Jackson's team. After everything I've done, it seemed like the least I could do was to give you a chance to get justice for your father. About? And why do you think so? I asked, perplexed. Because, as it turns out, Michael promised to give you to Cabrera as payment for helping us with our divorce. For a moment, I was frozen in shock. Everything turned upside down inside. A few seconds later, I was finally able to squeeze out the words. "Are you saying that your lover was going to give me to that bastard?" There was rage in my voice that could melt steel. Yes. When I found out about this, I knew I had to do something. I was close to killing Michael with my own hands, but Giulio beat me to it. He took care of Michael in prison to cover his tracks. As for me, Cabrera probably believed that I had to be sold too, knowing that I would never agree to disappear without a trace. But there is something else. More, my head was spinning from these revelations. Yes, Giulio tried to kidnap you more than once after he eliminated Michael, but we managed to prevent it. This was also part of my agreement with the authorities. Federal agents hoped he would make a mistake and fall into a trap if he didn't stop trying. But this did not happen. Lisa and Bill cared for you and watched over you, and they received help from many unnoticed people. After the fourth attempt, he seemed to give up. But I never forgot and vowed to destroy him with my bare hands if necessary, Anita said, her face turning purple with anger. They forbade me to communicate with you, but they did not forbid me to protect you, and I did it as best I could. Then you became an excellent sniper, able to fend for yourself, although every time you went on a mission, I almost went crazy with worry. I chose you for this mission because I knew you would do what I wouldn't have the strength to do. Tell me honestly, Olivia, how did you feel when you shot him? I felt good, I admitted. Then I looked at her more closely and saw the suffering on her face. 13 years had passed, but she still cared about me. I couldn't imagine how much pain she felt when she realized she had been deceived and lost her only child. My heart trembled and tears flowed from my eyes. Olivia. Mom, I cried as she hugged me. We both cried for a long time. I missed you so much, she said, crying. I have always loved you. I'm so sorry for everything I've done, for everything you had to endure. Can you ever forgive me? I imagined my father dying alone and in pain, and her cheating on him while he fought his illness, trying to provide for us. Allow me to speak freely, I said, clenching my teeth. She looked a little puzzled. Certainly. I swung and hit her hard. She recoiled. I had never been a master of hand-to-hand combat and had never hit another person outside of training or combat, but I put all the pain and bitterness for my father into that blow. She put her hand to her cheek and looked at me while I said, "This is for betraying my father, for leaving him to die alone." Then I hit her again, this time with my other hand. "And this is for leaving me and making me consider myself an orphan." When the anger subsided, I hugged her again, this time tighter. "You want to know if I can forgive you for all this. It won't be easy, but I think I can do it with time. But don't ever do anything like that again." "I won't," Anita whispered, rubbing her cheeks. "I guess I deserved this, and much more. You have a good shot." "I had a great teacher," I said, and she grinned through the pain. "That's my girl," she said, shaking her head. My handprints were visible on her cheeks, and she wiped the tears from my face, just as she did when I was a child. We finally calmed down and cleaned ourselves up, using up most of the box of tissues on her desk. "So, what do you plan to do when your time in the military comes to an end?" she asked when we sat back down. "Don't know. I was thinking about going to school, becoming a computer specialist like Dad." "You think you can put down your sniper rifle and be a calm-it professional after everything you've been through?" she asked doubtfully. "Don't know. I can try," I said. "Now I can afford it." She winced slightly, but nodded. "You look a lot like your father." On both of their fathers. Both served in the army, had impeccable reputations, and a whole box of medals that I didn't even know about. "I'm sure you can do whatever you want. But I have one more proposal." "About which?" "I have a set of orders here for you," Anita said, handing me a folder with documents. "How would you like to work with me at the Department of Homeland Security?" "What exactly will I be doing?" I asked warily. "The same thing you did in Colombia with Ryan. The world is full of people like Giulio, and they need to be held accountable. You can help me with this if you want. I admit I have an ulterior motive. I would like to get to know my only daughter again." Of course, you can never reveal who you really work with or what you do. What do you say? What can I say? The orders are already ready. I'm just a specialist, not even a sergeant. I simply cannot refuse the order, otherwise serious consequences may await me in the army. I would have found myself on some very uncomfortable and thankless task for the rest of my service, that's for sure. Anita noticed my internal contradiction and nodded, as if I had passed some kind of test. Just so you know, Olivia, the surgery you just performed is an example of what you will be doing. You will work outside the protocols, with a dossier in the archive classified top secret. You will not wear insignia, and you will often be sent to other countries without official permission from their governments. You will be operating under a clear and present danger order, but if you are captured, you will not be able to reveal your connection to the U.S. government. You will be presented as a private mercenary. This means that in some countries you will face torture or even execution. The army had to apply enormous pressure to release one of its best snipers and issue these orders. I hated what she did to my father, but I couldn't use it as an excuse to refuse orders. Part of me wanted to reconnect with my mother, but another part wanted to stay as far away from her as possible. This whole situation with her patronage made me feel uncomfortable. What will I tell my family? Where will I live? I asked, frankly dragging out the conversation. You can tell them you work for the Department of Homeland Security on special projects. You will never be able to reveal the true nature of your work, and of course, you cannot mention me. Anna Coleman is dead and should remain so. I think you understand the importance of maintaining secrecy. I understand, I answered quietly, trying to hide my irritation. I was a decorated combat soldier, and here a civilian woman, even my mother, was sitting in front of me, and she was trying to teach me the basics of secrecy. This really hurt me. As for housing, I rented a nice apartment for you in Alexandria, Virginia, and also provided you with a car. By order, you have been awarded the rank of corporal, and you will receive an increase to pay for housing. But I must warn you that as part of your new assignment, you will have to travel a lot. Of course, I replied. How long will this appointment last? I was slightly alarmed, and even frightened that this network of control began to tighten around me. The army provided barracks, and food this was expected. But the fact that my mother began to arrange housing and transportation for me herself reminded me that she still sees me as a child, despite my skills and experience. At least 2 years. When your military service is completed, we will discuss future plans. If by then you want to leave and go to school, we will let you go with gratitude on behalf of the nation. If you decide to stay, we will find other options for you. You can live with that, I replied. Great, Anita said, smiling slightly. Welcome to the team, Olivia. I look forward to working with you and getting to know you a little better. Me too, I replied. While part of me really wanted to know my birth mother again, another part had a lot of doubts. Anita stood up and, opening her arms, invited me to her. After a short pause, I walked up and hugged her. I have to admit, it felt good to feel her embrace again. But we'll be landing soon. Why don't you go back to the salon and get some rest? After landing, I will take you to your new apartment and explain how our rules will work. Okay, I replied and left her cabin. I returned to my seat at the back of the plane and looked out the window. My journey had come full circle, and I was starting over again, but I couldn't help but think about what and who I would meet in the next 2 years. One thing I knew for sure, people like Giulio Cabrera better watch out. I dozed off, and in a dream I saw the face of my father, who nodded at me with approval. Remember, Olivia, wherever you go and whatever you do, justice is always with you, he said in my dream. I didn't know what exactly he meant, but it sounded right. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.